by the use of the cotton gin. The cotton gin was invented not too far from Savannah by Eli Whitney. Now you'll notice here off to our starboard side, a black walkway that kind of connects the two pieces of property back there. That is known as Factors Walk. What factors were is they were brokers for the cotton industry. They would set the prices actually for the entire world at one point for the price of the cotton. Cotton would arrive here on barges or be picked in the plantations not too far from here. It would go into these cotton warehouses where it was prepared and cleaned by that cotton gin, removing all the sticks and stones, and then it was exported out to other places. So obviously a pretty big industry here in Savannah. Now if you look off to our port side here for a second, you'll notice quite a bit of development over there on Hutchinson Island. As you go up and down the river, you'll notice there isn't really a whole lot of development over on that part of the river, just because Hutchinson Island, as I mentioned, is somewhat man-made. Now all this dredge material that comes out of this river needs to go somewhere, so a lot of that was pumped over onto Hutchinson Island. If you were going to build anything over there, which you're actually kind of doing right now, you would need to build something like pretty much like you'd build a dock. You're going to drive beams deep down into the earth and then build that foundation up on top of those pilings. You would not be able to put a typical foundation over there just because that ground is so soft. But you'll notice they are actually putting, it looks like a parking garage, and putting up some condos and another hotel, as well as adding on to the Savannah Convention Center behind us. But Hutchinson Island actually is a pretty good population of alligators. I mentioned that earlier. There's a golf course over there with all kinds of fresh water around the greens and the fairways. It's kind of a natural habitat for the alligators. Really do not have any predators over there. So if you do happen to go over to Hutchinson Island, just make sure you stay on the beaten path. If you got a bad slice like I do when you golf, you maybe don't want to go chasing after your ball. You might just want to leave that where it's at. Alligators usually kind of tend to remain pretty still until you're right on top of them. So just be careful if you're over there. There's all kinds of signage sort of warning you about that over there on Hutchinson Island. Now if you look off to our starboard side in between those trees, you'll notice a statue of a young girl there waving her towel, standing next to her collie dog. Now that is a statue of Florence Martis, also known as the Waving Girl. A little bit about Florence. She was born out on Cockspur Island, which is out near the mouth of the Savannah River by Tybee Island. Her dad was in the U.S. military at the time, out at Fort Pulaski, which is right on Cockspur Island. Now, unfortunately for Florence Martis, her parents both died at a very early age. She was only about 18 years old. She was forced to move a little further inland with her brother George on Elba Island. He was a lighthouse keeper there. Now, as you can imagine, there really was not a whole lot to do for a young girl living on a deserted island, kind of in the middle of nothing. She had her collie dog keep her company, but she really had no friends, just her brother to kind of keep her company. What she found herself doing was waving at all these ships as they came in and out of the port here. It was estimated that in 44 years she waved at some 50,000 ships that passed by. She kind of yelled out to these ships as they went by, you know, what kind of cargo do you have on board, what's your name, where you're coming from, things like that. Now she actually became world famous for this, basically out of sheer boredom. She really had nothing else to do. But these sailors, looked upon her as a beacon of hope. They would arrive here sometimes after some pretty tough days out at sea, months at a time perhaps, to arrive here and be greeted by Florence Martis, either waving her towel during the day or perhaps a lantern at night. She actually had her collie dog trained to wake her up if she was sleeping at night when a ship was passing by. So as I mentioned, these sailors were very fond of Florence Martis. They would actually send her all kinds of gifts. She actually received a live llama in the mail from Peru at one point from a sailor. Still to this day, one of the largest funerals that's ever been held here in Savannah was for Florence Martis.
Hello, Cece, thank you.
Now the story you've probably heard about the Waving Girl is that she had fallen in love with a local sailor. The sailor said, Florence, I need to go out to sea one more time. I'm going to make us some money. I'm going to buy us some property. We'll have a family, settle down and live happily ever after, never to return. So it is said that she waited over 4 decades for her long-lost love to return, which of course he never did.
Aww.
Now later on in her life, Florence was asked about some of these things. She kept logbooks of all these ships that came and went. She had actually burned all of these logbooks at one time towards the end of her life, and the interviewer asked her, why would you do that? But at that point, she'd actually was pretty lonely. She kept all kinds of personal information in these logs, and she had known that she'd become world famous at this point. She really did not want all that information shared with the rest of the world. And of course, the same person asked her, Florence, what about this long lost love? And she did say, that was a touching story. Unfortunately, it is not true. But some people have argued that perhaps she was just very embarrassed that she had waited over 4 decades for one person to return, which of course he never did. All right, still off to our starboard side, you'll notice a few people at work there today. These are all new condos that are going up. If you got the budget, you can buy a nice 2 or 3 bedroom condo here on the river for about $2 or $3 million. Great location here, but kind of out of my price range, that's for sure. But I have a nice spot here. Now this project actually started in the early 2000s, and of course, U.S. kind of hit some economic problems there with the recession right around 2006 to 2008. This project pretty much came to a complete standstill until a few years ago. They sort of pulled those plans back out, dusted them off, and decided to go ahead with it. So that's kind of what you see over here, kind of adding on to our riverfront, kind of expanding it down towards this east end of town. We are approaching East Coast Terminal. This is another part of the Georgia Ports Authority that we have here. This is a lot where you'll see some of the trains over here kind of come in and go move that cargo. This is where you're going to see some more of the bulk items. Looks like they have all kinds of stacks of lumber over here. I believe this got imported in here on ships. It looks like it's kind of been going out on some of these trains, exported out to other places here in the country. But this is where you'll see a lot of the
Thank
bulk
you, Miss
items,
Julie.
things that you typically would not put into a semi-trailer.
Thank you,
And we're
guys.
going to look at some of these break bulk carrier ships here off to our starboard side as we get a little bit closer. We'll talk about those. Now you'll notice this river does widen here a little bit. This is a man-made thing. The Corps of Engineers is actually the ones that kind of sound the bottom of this river and maintain it, decide what they need to do with it. We have 3 of these turning basins is what they're called. That's why it's a little bit wider here. This is a place for these ships to get turned around. Obviously, it doesn't make a lot of sense to drive one of these ships up here this far in the river and have to back 16 miles back up to the coast. So it gives them a place to turn around, and sometimes when you have a couple 12 or 1,300 foot ships passing, they might need a little bit of a wider spot to be able to meet each other at.
Oo nga. Ang ganda dito. Ano kasi kami sa ship tour. Labor Day kasi ngayon dito sa Amerika. Today is Labor Day dito sa... So, my husband decided na i-treat ako sa tour dito sa Savannah River.
Definitely a little bit better environment for the dolphins if they do come up and down the river here. So, we have quite a migration of dolphins here in the summer months. This water gets up to about 85 degrees between here and Tybee Island. In the winter months, of course, as the water cools off, they usually kind of follow their food sources further south. But in the summer months, we get quite a few that come here. We actually have some come as far as Africa. Even get some Miami dolphins here. You can tell which ones those are. They always kind of fumble their food around and drop it, so you guys kind of know which ones are. One of my bad jokes. But here you'll notice all this lumber here off to our starboard side. We're coming up on a couple of these break bulk carriers. Now you'll notice as we pass by them, a couple different colors on the side. This first one, kind of a rusty gray there at the top with a red colored dump beneath that.
Thank you, my angel ko.
When these ships are fully loaded, you'll notice most of that hull paint is underwater, kind of like this first ship, the Winter Set.
Wow.
Now, about 95% of the ships that we have in here are foreign flag ships with foreign crews, of course. And when these ships navigate up and down the river, they actually have bar pilots and river pilots that actually board these ships about 10 miles off sea, climb up a ladder to get on these ships from a tugboat or a pilot boat, help these ships navigate in and out of the river here. As you can imagine, there's quite a few twists and turns with the current and everything. It's pretty tricky, so I definitely kind of want to have a local expert
Okay
on
lang,
the ship,
Sisi.
a guy in and over the river, as well as help get them on and off the dock. You'll notice quite a few tugboats there off to the port side. Those are ship assist tugs. You'll see those in most major ports in the United
Wow,
States.
nandyan ang mga seaman, guys,
Get these ships
sa loob.
on and off the dock. And some of the really big ships will actually kind of help them navigate the river, as well as help these big ships control their speed as they travel here in the Savannah River.
Look, ang laki ng ship na yan, Diyos mio.
So these foreign ships, these foreign crews, they get
Foreign
pretty
ship.
here. So this is actually our breakfast stock over here off the
Winter
side. You
set.
see a big pile of Captain Crunch cereal all stacked up over there. You see those big domes, those 3 domes. One actually has whole milk, another one 2%, another one vitamin D milk. So we definitely want to keep these guys kind of fed when they travel. Of course, we get some kind of funny looks here. So no, that is actually not our breakfast cereal dog. And that, unfortunately, is not Captain Crunch, otherwise...
wow. Sino ang may mga ano dyan?
Wood chips are
Asawa na
actually
seaman.
exported out of here to places like Turkey, where it's mixed in with resin and turned into particle board. Shipped back here to places like IKEA, Target, and Walmart.
Wow.
And of course, not milk in those domes. That is actually wood pellets. Wood pellets are typically shipped off to places like Germany, where this is used in some home heating.
Si Manluloko. Si Manluloko nandito.
Now you notice the ship here, the full steam, drawn up, sitting up a little bit
Nandito
higher.
siguro yun talaga,
And those,
Sisi.
the
Nga
one
dire,
that
oh.
exposed,
Tingnan mo, ang
when that
laki-laki.
ship's fully loaded, most of that would be underwater. A lot of these ships have their own cranes on board. Some of the ports they come into, they don't have the infrastructure to help
Si
load these ships.
si
So,
Manluloko.
they'll actually have these cranes with their own kind of buckets to help.
Hindi
load
naman
things.
siguro lahat,
You can see
Sisi,
those hatches,
na manluloko, no?
Are able to open up to kind of keep whatever cargo they have protected from the
Wow.
elements. You'll notice on the back of this ship here that kind of orange-looking submarine type thing that is actually the crew's lifeboat.
Cruise
In
light
emergency,
boat.
that the crew would climb into that, strap into some sort of a
Wow.
5-point harness. They pull a lever, hit a button, and that would
Ilan
do
kayong
a somewhat of a
mangluloko
free
sa
fall
kanya?
off the back of that ship into the ocean in an emergency. You definitely kind of got to do what you got to do in those times that something like that
Wow.
happens.
Now, 4.
Super lucky, oh. Diyos mio.
All right, if we keep our eyes over here on the starboard side, we are, look, just beyond that number 57 channel marker. Obviously not a whole lot of development here, but this was a very important part of Savannah's history here back in the day, dating back to World War II. This was home of the Southeastern Shipbuilding Corporation.
Marami.
Essentially what was happening in World War II,
Siguro, no?
we were having a hard time getting our supply boats back and forth across the ocean to places like Great
That's
Britain.
yeah,
with
57
our
mark
allies.
right there.
The German U-boats were essentially sinking our supply boats faster than they could make it to their destination or be built. A gentleman by the name of Henry Kaiser was contracted to build 2,710 Liberty ships. That was part of the Lend-Lease program. Perhaps you might remember that name from grade school. But 88 of those 2,010 Liberty ships were built here in Savannah. So this was a huge shipyard over here, right over here where all this marsh grass is.
Shipyard right
Thousands
here.
and thousands of workers over there. Now typically if you were going to build a ship, and these ships were pretty much carbon copies of each other, they were all about 410 feet long, all kind of had the same look, the same power. This was somewhat of an assembly line for ships, kind of a Henry Ford idea. Now typically if you're going to build a ship like that, you would rivet it together. The problem was a lot of the people that were skilled in riveting were off fighting in the war already, and riveting actually just was took a lot longer to do. The idea was to build these ships really quickly. They actually were able to build these ships in about 30 days. Just kind of flood the ocean with these Liberty ships to
30
get to other
days.
places,
Wow.
kind of faster than the U-boats.
30 days to build a ship.
Now, welding was somewhat of a new technique at that time, and it certainly has been perfected since then. But essentially, they would get the pieces here of these ships somewhat kind of prefabricated, all the same pieces. They would weld these pieces together, put these ships together, and even at today's standards, to build a 410-foot ship in about 30 days is pretty remarkable. However, the key word here is quickly, quality. The problem was a lot of these ships just really were not that well built. They weren't very fast, but they would get out into the ocean with those twists from those waves and cold waters from the North Atlantic. These ships would essentially kind of start to split apart at the seams as they were underway. They typically would try to keep 3 or 4 welders on these ships at all times, just to kind of patch them up. But as you can imagine, a lot of them did actually not make it to their final destination, and they were a few years later replaced by Victory ships, which are a little better built and had actually a little more speed to outrun the German U-boats. But nevertheless, a huge industry here back in the day, and a lot of the workers here in the shipyard, they actually were females, because as I mentioned, a lot of the males were actually fighting in war, so they had quite a mix of locals here that worked in this shipyard. Today is not too bad of a day. Can you imagine what it's like here in July and August? So this shipyard welding these ships together obviously got very hot. Great work conditions here.
Wow. They're building this ship, guys.
So this off to our starboard side. That is a big pile of gypsum. Gypsum is actually used in a lot of different products. Another big exported item out of here. Typically, gypsum is used in production of drywall. It's used in some concrete products. It actually gives concrete a little bit of a elasticity factor, so it doesn't crack quite so easy. And gypsum is actually used in some daily products like makeup and toothpaste. Another break bulk carrier here, the Gloria Confidence. Notice it's got its own cranes there on board. Off to our port here, we are kind of coming up on the east end of Hutchinson Island. We'll start getting a glimpse of South Carolina. That is off in the distance. Another little body of water over there on the other side of Hutchinson Island. That is part of the Back River. The Back River is part of the Savannah River. However, that part of the river is not navigated by the big ships. They do not maintain the water depth. Otherwise, they store some barges and some things like that over there. But same with the Savannah River here. If they did not dredge it, we only have about 10 feet deep on low tide, so they don't worry about that part of the river here for too much. If you look off to our starboard side, there's quite a few beams and things like that too. There's quite a bit of things that are used in the production of building highways and bridges. Those also get exported out of here as well. If you travel on Highway 16 today, you would notice quite a bit of construction. So we're using a lot of those products over there as well.
Grabe oh, ang laki na ano yan, ship?
Quite a few of those white domes off to our starboard bow. Those are part of conical floats. Keep a lot of petroleum products in there. Another big exported item out of here, as well as if you look straight ahead, you'll notice some big blue domes up there. That is part of the LNG, the liquid natural gas plant that is here. Get some pretty big tankers that come in and out of here, moving those petroleum products.
Buti nga hindi ka pa natutulog, Sisi. Si Miss Julie too. Gising
If you
pa.
look off to our port bow, in the back river, you'll notice a sunken dredge over there. That was a dredge that was here in the early 1980s. Much smaller than the dredges they use now, but no real big story behind that. But the crew did come in one morning and find that their dredge was sitting on the bottom of the river. Whether a storm came through, they had some sort of fire on board. It's unknown, but really does not sit in anybody's way. As I mentioned, they do not navigate that part of the river. So they essentially just kind of let it sit there, but it actually makes a pretty nice picture in the evening when the sun's going down behind it. And until it's in the way of any navigation, that's probably going to leave it. It looks like we actually have a bald eagle here off to our port side. You can see it in flight, kind of flying behind us. As I mentioned, we do have some bald eagles here. Pretty good size one, actually. Looks like he's, oh, there, a little better look. He's actually kind of heading towards our stern. So.
That's a seagull.
Seen quite a few eagles here a little more recently. Definitely kind of keep an eye out for some dolphins here as well as, of course, approach Fort Jackson.
Wow. Grabe. Sana all.
Now, this part of the river where it starts to fork off with the back river, this is part of 5 Fathoms Hole. What 5 Fathoms Hole was, as I mentioned, this river is dredged. When these sailing ships would arrive here during that early mid to late 1700s, they really could not navigate any further up the river than this. This is where the water depth, was fairly deep, and then it would kind of drop off as it went further down. What these ships would have to do is anchor here, wait for either small
actually a beautiful day.
Their cargo further inland, or perhaps just
not too hot.
for that tide to come up. But these ships would
And it's
anchor
not
here.
too
This part of the
humid
river,
either.
Savannah River does not have a whole lot of piracy that happened here back in the day. That was a little more further out on the coast by Tybee Island. There actually is an island called Blackbeard Island, which is a little bit to the south of here. But as far as on the Savannah River, there was not a whole lot of piracy except for this part of the river. Occasionally, the ships would be boarded as they anchored here at night. Whether the pirates would, looks like we might have a dolphin there off to the starboard side, just kind of keep an eye out over there. But just to finish my story, they would be boarded by these pirates. The pirates would actually
There it is.
steal some of the cargo and actually take that whole ship entirely, sail off into the ocean. So, but here off to our starboard side, kind of keep an eye out. Sometimes watching for these dolphins is like playing whack-a-mole. Sometimes just kind of pop up and never come back.
There he
You definitely
is.
kind of see one popping up over there. If you look towards where those white tanks are, a little bit of a bridge connecting those 2 pieces of cement. Definitely saw a dorsal fin pop up. So kind of keeping an eye off our starboard side. Typically, whenever you see one dolphin, there's quite a few others in the area around it, known as a pod of dolphins. Once in a while, we see them actually breach or jump out of the water. That's always pretty cool. Sometimes we have these big ships come in and out of the river, especially through this part. You'll see the dolphins actually kind of playing in the bow wake of these ships as they pass by. So very playful, smart, loving animal. No ahead of us, folks, we are coming up on Old Fort Jackson, the oldest still standing brick fort here in Georgia. Tons of history behind Old Fort Jackson, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get a little bit closer. But I just kind of wanted to mention one thing first, because they do fire a little bit early sometimes. They actually are going to be seeing I believe today, being a holiday, I think they're still going to have, they usually do a cannon firing as we pass by. It is very loud, so if you do have small children, don't like loud noises, or perhaps you have a service animal or something like that with you, you might want to cover their ears. They will be actually firing a 6-pound cannon at us as we get up next to it.
Oh,
Anybody
6-pound
catches that
cannon.
cannonball, you can turn it in at the snack shop with Connor. He'll give you a free smoothie. No, they won't be firing anything at us today, folks. But typically they would shoot a 6-pound cannonball out of this particular cannon. They'll be firing here. Usually when we get broadside, yep, the reenactor is out there. Usually when he puts his arm up, that means he's about ready to fire that cannon. So once again, just kind of a last warning, it is very loud.
Okay, this is interesting. Cannonball.
Hoping some more of these dolphins pop up here too. Definitely keep an eye out for that.
Cannonball right there, guys.
And you'll be firing that cannon right from the parade ground in front of the fort. I see where there's quite a few spectators there.
Wow.
Top of the hill.
There they are. Woo! Wow.
I knew it was coming.
You're another one.
Yes.
Woo!
You'll notice up on top of that fort, those are actually 32-pound cannons. They'll be firing that in 3, 2. No, they won't be firing any more cannons.
Oh.
Just the one. But you'll notice if you look around this fort, they actually have a moat that was used for defensive purposes as well as some sanitary purposes. Everything kind of washed in and out with the time.
Wow, what a treat.
Some different uses. Now, as I mentioned, Old Fort Jackson still the oldest standing brick
Thank
fort here in Georgia.
you.
No, it has tons of history behind it. But it was basically built in anticipation of the war. We did see a whole lot of action for that. Was a little more instrumental in the Civil War. Now, as a Union Army kind of set up off the coast of the Mouth Savannah, we actually have Fort Pulaski up there. Now, the Fort Jackson was taken over relatively easily by the Confederates at the beginning of the Civil War, just because of its location. They really had no presence of Union soldiers here. It's held by a caretaker.
We're turning
so,
around,
Confederate
guys.
Army essentially just kind of knocked on the door and took that fort over. That made people here in Savannah feel very secure that they actually had this stronghold here in this part of the river. Obviously a great location to have a fort where the river kind of forks off. And as I mentioned, this was kind of the furthest some of these bigger ships could come up here because of the water depth here in this river. Now, the Union actually moved in on Fort Pulaski, which is about 10 miles behind us, after a 30-hour bombardment of that fort from Tybee Island. Now, the rifle cannon was relatively new at the time. The Union Army set up shop there on Tybee Island on the beach on that fort for 30 hours. The Confederates just had traditional cannons to fire back at them. Anything they shot back at the Union Army pretty much just went into the ocean. But all those rifle cannons actually had the range to fire on Fort Pulaski. So the Union did take over Fort Pulaski. That actually made the people here in Savannah pretty nervous. They had the Union Army knocking on the door, and they actually had a blockade set up off the coast there to kind of keep the supplies coming in and out of here for the Confederates. Now, the Union Army, had they tried to take over Fort Jackson, tried to take over Savannah from this part of the river and from the east side, they really would have stood a chance. Would have been kind of a suicide mission. The Confederates had a very big stronghold here. They had all kinds of military personnel here, as well as artillery. Cannons were lined up pretty much on both sides of the river here, all over. The Union Army would not have a chance had they come through here. Now, William Tecumseh Sherman, he had actually taken over Atlanta at that point. If you remember the term, the March to the Sea, that was very instrumental in the Civil War, kind of ended that Civil War for us. But Tecumseh Sherman realized that he had no chance to come through this part of the river. He thought it was better to come from the west, and even against the advisement of Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant at the time, they didn't think it was a good idea. He still was given the green light to go ahead and proceed with that march to the sea from Atlanta. Now, on his way here, he actually burned all these cities and everything kind of in between it. Places like Augusta, Macon, all those cities were essentially burned to the ground on his way here. That's why you really will not see any historic buildings back in the 1700s and 1800s, buildings in those places, because there just really was nothing left of them. Now, however, when he arrived here, the Confederates did try to move some of their military operations to the west side, but they just really did not stand a chance against that Union Army that Sherman had. So did the thinking of the people here in Savannah, they just decided to surrender their city. They did not want to see their Savannah to Sherman. Now, Sherman actually arrived here, kind of fell in love with Savannah. He thought it was really beautiful, so he did spare the city. He actually gave it to Abraham Lincoln as a Christmas present. So the city was spared. That's one reason we have all those beautiful historic buildings and churches that are still standing today.
Mag-out na ako kasi sobrang init na.
I want to talk about the CSS
So,
Georgia.
shout out sa inyo lahat. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the wonderful
blockade runner. As I mentioned, the Union had that
gifts
blockade
that
set
you
up on the
guys
coast.
prepare
They
for me.
wanted something that could punch through
All
that
the great
blockade.
things. Thank you so
But the
much.
Problem was they really couldn't get the supplies here because of that blockade to build a proper gun
Bye-bye,
ship. So what they
Sisi.
did, took a wooden frame, started finding any pieces
Thank you so
that
much.
they could put towards use of this ship, whether it was railroad ties and any kind of iron or steel. These ship was pieced together, obviously made it really heavy just because of the materials of what they had, and all they could find